All right, so welcome back to the podcast, Kelvin Holly, for a part two since we had to dodge tornadoes last time.
Right.
It's been about a week ago, so everything going good?
Yeah, man. Yeah, real good.
Thanks again, and yeah, I really enjoyed the interview last time, and since then I've thought a lot about the conversation you were talking about. Being in Germany and in Turkey and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was, as a teenager, it was pretty, I was lucky to experience some other cultures as a
that's really
kid,
cool, because a lot of
just
people don't get that,
Yeah.
especially at that young of an age.
Right. So, yeah, it really shaped my future beliefs and stuff, was experiencing other cultures and other countries and stuff like that,
Yeah,
music too, for that matter, Turkish, Middle Eastern music, which I really still have an affinity for.
So, I mean, that's obviously all kind of Middle Eastern area, but Germany is not Middle Eastern. That's European. So,
yeah.
What's the... I mean, I've never been to either one of the places like Germany. I'd love to go to Germany. That's a bucket list.
Yeah.
What are your comparisons musically? Like, if you had to,
You mean Germany
versus Turkey? I mean,
it's completely different. German. Of course, I didn't listen to a lot of music when I was in Germany, other than what I was interested in, which was mainly at that time. What you're talking, late '60s. It was everything that was coming out of Britain and some that was coming out of here too.
Yeah.
But as far as German music, get a lot of beer polka music and German pop songs and stuff like that. It's kind of squeaky clean stuff. So.
But yeah, I find that really fascinating because, I mean, even growing up around here, a lot of the music that it was formative growing up and influential. I didn't realize it was influential until years later. Like, oh yeah, because you don't really, I'm trying to remember who I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, 2 or 3 days ago, was saying that a lot of the music you listen to when you're younger isn't always, it may have not been what you were intentionally listening to, but it was there.
Well, everybody's
and you couldn't avoid it.
Yeah, everybody's a product of their environment.
Right.
In my case, there were 2 radio stations in Turkey and in Germany that you could pick up, and that was the Armed Forces radio network, which they played a lot of stuff that was from America. And then you had Radio Luxembourg, which came out of, Luxembourg. And they played a lot of rock music. So, I mean, I was listening to Hendrix and Cream and John Mayall, Steppenwolf, all the stuff that was popular here, CCR, Motown, of course, all the stuff that was coming out of Muscle Shoals at that time that was on the radio, Mustang Sally and stuff like that,
Which leads us kind of to where we left off before we got evacuated by tornadoes, which never really happened, thank God. But you were talking about working with Johnny Sandlin in Decatur a lot, and which kind of introduced you to the Muscle Shoals thing, and you guys were playing BJ's Deli in Decatur, and there was a place here in town you guys were playing weekly and kind of got in with the Decoys thing that way.
Yeah.
And you mentioned working with a lot of indie bands, Widespread Panic and Greg Allman and all of that. Did you work on those records, or were you just
on some Greg Allman records? I didn't work on any Widespread Panic records. I mean, they were a self-contained band, and they were relatively a new band at that point. They didn't.
Yeah, that would have been probably 92, 93,
even earlier than that. 90, 91. But they had come to Johnny's to cut up what I think was their first album, and I met them all. They're really nice guys, and me and Mikey Hauser, the guitar player, were talking. He was asking me about what guitars I had, and But anyway, he asked me if he could borrow a couple of them on the record, in which I took them over there. It was like an old silver tone, just things like that.
Oh, that's interesting.
But, we became friends and everything, and
he definitely had a unique style.
Yeah,
he had his own little thing.
Yeah, he had his thing, man, kind of Jerry Garcia meets Dickie Betts or something, kind of something similar,
And like he used a volume pedal a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, you don't really see that often, but.
Yeah, I mean, some people use they'll use the volume pedal to do like swells, or some guitar players use it as their volume knob as opposed to using their volume knob on their guitar. So.
Well, that's neat though, because I mean, stylistically, and I like Widespread Panic. It's not like I listen to them every day, but that era to me was really what was kind of the core of who the band was.
Yeah, well, one thing I learned from them is the fact that they went on the road a lot, and they garnered this massive fan base, and they encouraged their fans to make tapes.
Yeah.
Like they did with the Dead, back in the day. And then, somebody would record it, and then it would get out, and then would turn other people onto it. So,
well, that's how I got into it.
Yeah, they did everything themselves. They didn't have like these major record deals and record label money and everything. Right. They did everything. So they kind of set a standard for other bands. Say, hey, we could probably do this too, But one thing I always tell the younger bands and musicians, I said, as much as the business part of it has changed, one thing that hasn't changed is you still have to go out on the road and play every shithole in the country, whether it's for 5 people or 50 or 500,
Amen to that. And you play a lot more times for 5 people
oh, yeah.
than you do for...
Yeah, so, but if you gain 5 new fans, then... mission accomplished.
Do the math.
Move on
5
to the next
plus 5 equals 10.
Yeah,
That's I'm glad to hear you say that, because there's so much, the music industry, and it's like, there are issues, but at the same time, people still love music. They want to hear good music. They want to go out and have a good time.
And you have to have... I remember, Scott Boyer and the Decoys, when we were talking about the Allman Brothers, he was real tight with all those guys, when they first started. But he said one thing in particular about Dwayne Allman was the fact that he just wasn't going to be denied. They were going to make it one way or the other. And you have to have that determination,
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for just
There's going to be a lot more
staying with
setbacks
something
than there are victories, So... You have to have that attitude like, hey, man, we're the greatest band in the world, and we're not going to be denied, And at some point, your ship's going to come in, so. Yeah,
there's a lot to be said for tenacity. Yeah. I mean, just because there's so many people just quit. So.
Well, it's brutal. Everybody thinks it's, the general public thinks it's all this glory stuff.
Well,
and
they see it.
They see you do on the stage doing your show, but it's all the other stuff. I mean, I always said, for years, I've always said, the music's free. It's all the other stuff you get paid for.
Right. I mean, you load in your gear and
just the driving and the no sleeping and the on and on and on, so.
Well, kind of moving on from that, so I guess just take off with where we left off. I mean, you're working with Johnny Sandlin. You're in Muscle Shoals
I got
area.
the gig with his band that he started called the Decoys, and he would call me for sessions whenever he had, I was like his first call guy. I guess mainly because I was close by. But yeah, I played on a lot of stuff in the early '90s that he was cutting on different artists, so. And then at some point he got so busy doing that he had to leave the band. He basically just kind of turned it over to us. I mean, he was still involved.
Well, I always wondered what transpired with that, because that was kind of his band, wasn't it?
Yeah, he just got busy, know, and so we went through several bass players, and we were lucky enough to end up with David Hood.
Right.
And don't get any better than that, but
no.
David's still playing with us, so.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I mean, I didn't come around in Muscle Shoals till you guys were that unit.
Yeah.
With Scott and Mike and
And at one point, we had Roger Hawkins and David as our rhythm section, you know.
Oh, wow. Hey, come on in, Dan.
Hey, Dan.
How's it going,
Welcome.
gentlemen? Oh, we got the lights on today.
Yeah,
in trouble.
we're being interrogated.
Has he got the hot lights or just?
We got light bulbs. You were talking about working with Tommy Shaw and Montgomery and all that. I know we're kind of
Well, I never
backtracking,
worked
but
with Tommy Shaw.
in the band, you kind of.
I just took his place in the band
Okay.
he was in before he left to join Styx.
Well, Dan kind of geeked out because
Yeah, I'm
he's a
still
huge
geeking
fan.
out. That's
Yeah. So
I mean, we've jammed together before, but we were never officially in a band together, you know. So
he's just a kind of an idol of mine, really.
yeah, well, I can understand. Tommy's extremely talented. You know, he's great. He was a great songwriter and an excellent guitar player and singer, and he's got all the goods. You know, he's got the look, he's got the hair.
Dude has nice
He's a
hair.
rock god. You know, what can you say?
Yeah. All right. So, kind of taking us on, we're kind of, I think, probably like early mid '90s, Muscle Shoals. So, what are some projects, some of your first projects you were actually working on once you kind of got settled in here?
Well, trying to think.
Well, I guess when did you hit the road with Little Richard? You've been on the road with him for.
I started with Little Richard in '94.
Okay, so that would be about that time frame.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I got to know several of his band members lived here, you know, and
Wayne Chaney, was he the band leader at the time?
Well, no, Travis Womack was at that time, but it was Wayne and Travis, Guy Higginbotham, and Chalmers Davis.
Oh, yeah.
They were the only white boys in the band, and Travis's son, Monkey.
I didn't know Monkey was in the band.
Yeah,
Did he play drums?
He was the drummer.
Oh, wow.
Only a drummer would
But
be
see,
named
one
Monkey.
thing about Little Richard's band is he always liked to have two of everything.
Yeah, when I
And
saw you guys, it was like, wow.
went back to when
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix was playing in the band.
Yeah.
Back in the '60s. But
Which still trips me out.
sometimes somebody wouldn't show up for one reason or another. You know, whether they were partied too much the night before or whatever. So Richard got to a point where he would just hire two of everything: two bass players, two drummers, two guitar players, two keyboard players. That way, if somebody didn't show up, he was covered, you know. So I got to a point in the '90s where he wanted another guitar player, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it got to like, well, it was either Travis or Wayne, or I think Richard had asked them, you know, about it. And so they said, yeah, we got a buddy at home that would be great, you know. So, I mean, out of the blue one day, I got a call from Richard, and I was on a plane to LA the next day and met him. First time I'd ever met him. And I played with him that night at some performing arts center out there in LA with the Temptations, and been, stayed with him almost 20 years, so.
So what's it like to get a phone call like that?
Well, at first I thought somebody was pulling my leg. I thought it was one of his band guys that I knew trying to talk like him. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's one thing. Richard has such a unique way of talking, and even going back to the Jimi Hendrix days, you know, I've seen interviews with people that were friends with Jimi Hendrix that one of the funniest things he did was imitate Little Richard.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so we all do it because we know him, you know, and so.
Well, he calls you Calvin, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's just, he calls me Calvin, you know, which is fine. I always told him as long as he spelled my name right on the check, I was good.
Right.
Whatever he wanted to
Right.
call me, you know.
So if you got a story from the days with Little Richard,
A story?
yeah.
You just made it real hard. I think you're asking her to pick one.
I don't know, man. You'd have to lead me down a path. I don't know. You know, a lot of stories.
Well,
Let's see.
I don't really know what to ask as far as that goes.
Richard was he was funny.
Yeah.
You know, Richard was the king of the one-liners. He just makes stuff up, you know, like, I remember one day we were on this bus somewhere and we stopped and I got a sandwich. It had a lot of onions on it. And he was sitting there watching me eat it. He goes, you got a lot of onions on that sandwich, boy. I said, yes, sir, I do. He said, you know, an onion is a medicine. I said, yeah, I heard that. Onions, garlic, stuff like that, you know, it's like a natural antibiotic, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you know, Calvin, he said, you eat an onion, you won't get no bunion. But it was just things like that he would say that would just crack you up, you know. He was a funny guy, man. He
Sounds
really
like it was
was.
a real fun time. And
He was really funny. And he, you know, he wasn't crazy about flying, you know, especially if it was turbulent, you know, which we experienced many times. But one particular time, we were on a flight from Europe. We'd been in Europe for several weeks touring around with Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee and all those guys. But the plane started rocking and rolling about halfway over the Atlantic Ocean pretty bad, and we could hear Richard screaming all the way from first class cabin up there. You know? You know, we were basically in the back of the plane having our own good time, you know, and we could hear him up there screaming and praying and stuff, and he was saying, "Oh Jesus, oh God bless the pilot, the co-pilot." And then he started naming off the parts of the plane, you know. Oh, God bless those flaps and the hydraulics and on and on and on and on, you know. And at one point, I think one of the flight attendants came back to see if any of us could come up there and calm him down, you know. And so,
That's awesome.
you know, it's just things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just tons of
So what was it like performing with someone who essentially created rock and roll?
Well,
I mean, as a rock and roll, as a guitar player,
it was, for me, I stood next to him. I was right by the piano.
Right.
And it got to a point after a couple of years, because sometimes Richard would start talking a lot during performances and stuff, you know. And then he'd kind of look at me, and I'd give him this look like, okay, let's play. You know, it's time to play. Or it got to a point where I was calling songs to him. Like he'd get so far out talking to the audience that he'd kind of lose track of where he was, and I would just kind of get him back on track, you know.
Yeah.
My job as a guitar player with him basically was play like Chuck Berry. I mean, because that's what it was. Everything was in the key of C, F, or G. I mean, I never once had one rehearsal with him.
Really?
Never. So
It was either you could do it or you couldn't.
Yeah, I mean, you know, C, F, and G. I mean, how hard is that?
Right,
you know?
exactly.
I mean, some of the songs have a lick, you know, you have to play a signature lick, but for the most part, you're just playing Chuck Berry, you know.
Right.
And, I mean, he never told me, per se, but, you know, it's kind of a no-brainer that's what
it's just an understood
He never,
thing.
you know, he let me solo however I wanted or anything like that, you know, but yeah, that was my gig, you know, so.
So, you also played, you played with Neil Young too, didn't you, some? Or,
Well,
I know you played with Peggy Young for a while.
I played with Peggy, yeah, and 8 years with her, God rest her soul, but.
Yeah.
We jammed with Neil a lot. I mean, when I joined the band, Neil had some downtime, and he was writing a book at the time. So we'd go to the ranch and we'd be rehearsing, or we'd have gigs around the area, and Neil would tag along with us, and he'd be the rhythm guitar player.
That's interesting.
So we'd show up at a club somewhere, and there's Neil Young, and then the word would get out, and all of a sudden the place is packed.
Right.
Just hang back,
He
Neil.
was just like Neil. I always got along great with Neil. You know, he's another funny guy, real dry sense of humor.
He super intelligent.
Oh yeah.
Right.
He's
like he's invented.
well, he
a ton of
follows
stuff.
the muse. You know,
Right.
whatever he's interested in at the time, he sees it through. You know, whether it be as a
Right.
music or writing songs or electric cars or trains or electric trains or whatever he was interested in, So high definition audio.
You really got to admire that. It seems like a lot of people get stuck in a creative rut and just do the same thing until their career isn't a career anymore.
Yeah, well, it's one thing about Neil, he's always reinventing himself, whether people like it or not, he never really gave a shit, so.
Well, I mean, you got to kind of admire that in a guy.
No, I really do.
You really do, because that's hard.
One thing, you're not an artist. I mean, speaking monetarily, you're not going to be successful if you don't have a fan base.
Yeah.
That's pretty simple, yeah.
It's all a crapshoot. I mean, to me, it's all. I mean, you can work your ass off for decades and still be doing the same thing you were doing when you started.
Yeah.
It's a crapshoot whether you get a hit album. It's a crapshoot whether your song goes to number one. On and on and on and on.
So what are your thoughts on kind of the current state of the music industry and like Muscle Shoals, for instance, since the documentary and all that kind of stuff came out, and it's been somewhat of a resurgence? And
well, I think it's wonderful. Especially with social media being what it is now, it's always kind of the flavor of the month club. To me. The movie comes out, it generates all of this. I mean, Muscle Shoals has been around forever.
Exactly, yeah.
The fact that a movie comes out and all of a sudden people are, oh, wow, I didn't ever, which is great because they told the whole world, hey, we're here, And so a lot of people come here to tour around and see, which is great for tourism and stuff like that, but it's my belief that at some point, it'll die down and the excitement will wear off. And, of course, there's still a lot of bands that come here and record just to have the prestige of saying, we cut our album at this studio or that studio. Or a lot of bands come down here think they're going to get some kind of secret mojo. Because they're cutting in some famous room.
Right, that's really no different.
Hem of the garment sort of thing.
It's not, it's still all about the song and the performance,
Yeah.
So.
And
you can cut it in your closet. It doesn't matter. If the song is good, it's going to stand up on its own, so.
I wasn't going to ask you about this, but I kind of want your opinion on something. I had an opportunity yesterday to real briefly speak with a guy he's a producer. He's worked on a couple of fairly high profile albums, and he said, the thing you have to remember, rock and roll is not dead, but it's definitely taken a back seat to hip hop and the pop of the day. But it seems like around here that's not true, right? I mean, you can go out any night of the week and catch a pretty decent rock and roll show in Muscle Shoals, or when we still had a lot of venues you could. But do you think that's true? Do you think rock and roll's...
Well, I always look at... It's hard to keep up with all the genres that are out there. I never really paid attention to it. I always just look at it as music. I like certain types of music. I don't like certain types of music. So I don't lump it into like this group of, of genres or anything like that. I either like it or I don't. I listen to a lot of different stuff, People will turn me on to say, hey, man, have you heard this? I go, no, I'll check it out. And I'll check it out and go, wow, I really like that,
So what's an example of something, like, or do you listen to music much in your car or whatever? I mean, what's something
I'm going to be honest with you, man. Unless it's something I'm really checking out, or somebody tells me about, I'll listen to it. If it doesn't grab me right off the bat, I'm over it.
Yeah.
For the most part, when I do listen to music, it's old stuff that I like. And the fact that I play all the time, I have to get away from it. I have to give my ears. I have to get away from it.
I do too. That's why I've kind of gotten into the being obsessed with podcasts and audiobooks and just
Yeah.
You know, things like
a lot
that.
of times, you know, like well, on the internet, you know, like I'll go on YouTube or something and I'll stumble. You stumble across something and you go, wow, I really like that, you know, and so you go buy their CD or whatever, you know, or download or whatever you do nowadays, you know. But one thing I'm not a fan of is this streaming thing, you know. It's like instant gratification, paying one fee every month. It's like artists just don't get paid like they used to.
I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it, and I think everybody kind of does. It's like, well, yesterday I went to New Wave Vinyl, and you don't get the conversation of talking with the guy behind the counter.
You know, back in the 60s and 70s.
Hey, we got this in.
Yeah, in the 60s and 70s, as an example, you know, it was an event when somebody had a new album that was coming out. It was like, man, I can't wait. And
so you'd run into your buddies at the record store.
You know, you get it and you bring it home and you're holding it. And you're looking at the credits was the big thing.
Oh, yeah.
You know, looking at...
That's one thing you don't get on digital stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you know, nowadays when you download, I mean, you got to do some research to find out
who did what,
where was it cut, who's playing on it, and all that stuff. Which I'm generally interested in.
Yeah, well, growing up, I mean, you guys are probably the same way, but I can only speak for myself. It was like I found myself fascinated, and I didn't really understand why, but I was fascinated by where it was done, like what city or country.
Well, that's how I found out about Muscle Shoals in Memphis and L.A. And
it let me into that world of the band a little bit.
Yeah,
it was like, I always assumed like the recording studio was this mystique, and this thing, which in ways it kind of is, but I don't know. It was this allure of feeling like I was into their world a little bit more, and I was. You'd sit, you'd have a couple buddies over, you'd listen to the record, be it CD, cassette, or,
Well, it was always one of the cool things about being in a band. Everybody had a common interest and a common goal, and you were buddies, especially when you're a teenager and you're in your first couple of garage bands, and it's something that you can all do together. It was fun.
Always sad when it's over, too. I don't know. I'm always
sometimes
sad.
Yes, sometimes no.
Right. Sometimes it's like, thank God.
I was hanging out.
Neil Young was famous for leaving tours right in the middle of it, just leave everybody hanging,
Oh, no, going back to the physical record thing, I've got students that have told me before, they don't even own a turntable, but they will go buy a record, a piece of vinyl, to have something to hold, to have the artwork to look at.
Sure, I think it's cool. Now.
Yeah, and they don't even have a way to play it.
They don't even have it, but they want to own it.
Yeah, that's interesting to me. Very interesting.
I don't like single culture, Maybe that's me being old.
Plus, it was a thing, too, with albums where you would listen to the whole thing, from top to bottom. Nowadays, folks will just download their favorite song off of.
Well, and really, that's not a whole lot different from what it was in the 50s and 60s. It's kind of reverted decades back to being more singles driven.
Yeah.
It's like the labels were more concerned about let's get a single out quick, and 60s, 70s hits. A little later on, you start having records and a product.
Everything changes. It's like, everybody was all, like in the 60s and 70s, your song had to be 3 minutes or less.
Yeah.
And then gradually, somebody put out a song that was 6 or 7 minutes, like Stairway to Heaven, and all of a sudden, well, that rule's out the window, so they changed the rule,
Well,
maybe it's me being
everything
old.
is always subject to change.
Exactly, yeah.
That just worries me a little bit because, I feel like, I guess it's maybe a cliche example, but I don't feel like Dark Side of the Moon could happen today. Or if it did, it would happen in somebody's bedroom and it would get 100 listens on Spotify and that'd be the end of it.
Well, I mean, look at Chris Stapleton Chris has been around for years and years and years. People never even heard of him. you know. And then all of a sudden, he redoes a George Jones song.
Yeah.
That no one knows is a George Jones song.
That's a massive. All of a sudden, it's a massive hit.
Exactly.
You know, so.
Well, that's again back to the power of a song.
Yeah, I mean,
too,
Chris hit 777. Speaking of crapshoots, you know, I mean, that's what it was, you know.
Right.
And it put him on a path to success, you know. So.
Speaking of George Jones, saw him at the Alabama Music Hall of Fame probably 20 years ago now. Just such an amazing concert. Love the Possum.
Wow. Yeah, so you also worked with Amazing Rhythm Aces.
Yeah, I've been playing with them since '95.
And Russell, I recorded a vocal on him for that thing with the tribute to Spooner, Oldham, and Dan Penn.
Right.
And he's an interesting little guy.
Yeah, he is.
He's very consistent with his vocals, and he knows what he wants, and he's talented.
Well, that's the thing about, you know, people know their strong points and they know their weaknesses, you know, so they stick to their strong points, you know, and he knows what his are, you know,
so
he's not going to sing like anybody else.
Well, you wouldn't want him to.
So,
it wouldn't be him.
I mean,
any story like with the Aces or any Peggy Young story, you know, or anything like that?
Grant, I've got so many. I don't even know where to start.
Sounds like he's got 25 years of stories.
Yeah, I know. So, well, let me ask this. I mean, going back to the Decoys, you know, Scott Boyer, you know, we were all friends. You guys, he was best man in your wedding, right?
Yeah, we were tight.
So,
for sure.
Anything, you know, just honor of him that you would want to say, you know, as far as what it like meant being in the band with him? And
well, you know, first of all, you know, as a musician, you when you're young, you're listening to music, and you're looking at your records, and you're looking to see where it was recorded, who all's playing on it. I was a huge fan of music that was coming out of Muscle Shoals. I was a fan of the music that was coming out of Macon, Georgia on the Capricorn label. Allman Brothers, Wet Willie, Marshall Tucker, the Southern Rock thing, you know. Little did I know years later that I would end up here with those guys being some of my best friends.
yeah.
You know, so it's weird how things like that turn out. I never planned it. It wasn't a goal of mine. Well, I'm going to work with Johnny Sandlin, or I'm going to be in a band with Little Richard, or I'm going to, you know, it was just fate. I mean, you know, you just follow the path. I was attributed to, like, you get on one bus, when the bus stops, you get off, and hopefully there's another bus waiting that you can get on.
Yeah.
You know, but it's just part of the journey. You know, it's just part of the journey. So, opportunities present themselves. You know, I've never been a self promoter. I suck at it. Some people aren't. They can promote. I never did it. You know. But I was lucky enough to, you know, word of mouth is still one of the best things in the world, you know. So-and-so, if you know so-and-so, and so-and-so tells so-and-so, and on and on and on. You get a phone call one day, hey, so-and-so said, you know, you might be interested in checking this gig out, or this record, or whatever, you know, come play on it, or come play in the band. It's like, with Peggy Young, for instance, I mean, it's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm half asleep on my couch, you know, and the phone rings, and it's Spooner's wife, Karen, asking me what I'm doing, you know. I knew Spooner, you know, played with Neil, and I knew that Spooner was playing in the band with Peggy. I didn't know. I was a Neil Young fan, but I didn't know anything about Peggy's music, nothing, you know. And so I asked Karen. I said, "Well, what's happening?" She said, "Well, they were out at ranch rehearsing for a tour that she's going to do, and her guitar player had some sort of a freak out meltdown and quit.
Really?
And I suggested you. And so they went on the internet and checked you out.
Oh, wow.
You know, can you get on a plane? I said, well, yeah. I said, like when? She said, like now. And I said, well, I can probably get on the first thing running in the morning, you know. So they got me a ticket, and I flew to Neil Young's ranch the next day, and I found myself in this whole new world, you know. I went in, and they had one of Neil's amplifiers, one of his guitars. I played 2 songs with her. I listened to them one time, played them. She just looked at me and said, welcome to the family. And so that was just that easy. You know?
Yeah, she seemed like a really sweet lady the time she was
great.
down here.
I loved her. I love her, man. She was great. Just a huge heart, you know. And
yeah, seemed like that was a tragic thing that she died like that.
Yeah.
Just so I know you guys have had that really hit you between the eyes, you know.
Oh yeah,
so
definitely wasn't expecting that.
Well, no, I don't think anybody was. I mean, she'd been sick, but she had been doing better.
She'd been doing better, and we weren't expecting that. So,
well, so what are you? Right, I mean, what are you working on now that you're super
man, I'm
excited
doing the
about?
same thing I've been doing for 50 years. I'm playing in bands and at the sessions when I get them, and I'm just the same thing. You know, I don't know what else to do. You know, so you just wait. I'm really, you know, I mean, I could sit here and go, which I've thought about. You know, you always think about a lot of things, but I'm at my age, I'm not interested in starting another band, or I'm kind of comfortable with what I'm doing. You know.
Well, the whole fathers and sons thing, like last night at Flobama, was awesome. You should have been there, Dan. It was really cool. I mean,
well, we're there every Tuesday, so
yeah, you got to go. Well,
I've seen a few fathers and sons shows.
Yeah, yeah, it was cool.
One thing it was the same thing with Decoys. You know, we never rehearsed.
Well, I mean, you guys play together in the studio all the time.
Well, that
together,
was one thing with me and Will, and you know, we always enjoyed playing together, and when we did, it was always it was either on a session, or maybe it was a Hall of Fame banquet, and then I think Will said one night, you know, we should play together more or something. I said, well, let's start a band.
Which is really cool.
You know,
I mean, watching you two guys play together is awesome.
I said, maybe we can find a place here in town we can play one day a week.
Which,
and we did, and
there you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's music therapy to me, because we're not I mean, we can just play whatever we want. You know?
It's kind of it's a hang for everybody. It's nice to kind of everybody to kind of community to kind of gather together. And you know, last night I was sitting at the table with George Lair and Coy Fulmer and James LeBlanc, and we were all talking for a while, and then, you know, saw Marie Louie and talked with her and her husband a little while. So you see people.
Yeah,
and that's nice.
And plus you never know who's going to pop in. I mean, like last night we had Freebo there, you know, from Bonnie Raitt's band in the old days, you know. And
so that's cool.
You just never know, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
I guess we need to start wrapping this up because I know you've got to get gone pretty quick. But Dan, you got any other questions?
Well, you know, I didn't realize we'd been in here 45 minutes. I was going to ask you, did you have a piece of gear that you either lost or sold or had stolen you really missed, something you really want to have back?
Oh, really? You just went down that rabbit hole?
I'll be honest with you. If I could have back all the guitars or amps that I have either traded or that were ripped off or I had loaned people that got tore up, or I mean, I could literally probably retire independently wealthy. I mean, I've had every kind of course, you know, a lot of the guitars I had, the ones that are worth the most were I had back in the early 70s or 70s, and at that time the vintage market wasn't really what it is now. You know? a '59 Les Paul didn't cost almost $1 million, you know.
That was just an
And
old.
I had one of those, you know.
Oh no.
I've had Strats from the '50s or Tellys or you know, Plexi Marshalls and on and on and on, you know. But you get caught up in the times, and a new piece of gear comes out, and you really like it, and you really want it, and I'm going to trade you this '54 Stratocaster for that whatever.
Right.
You know, or stuff like that, you know. Of course, like I said, and you know, at the time it wasn't considered vintage or cool or anything like that, you know. So,
well, you use Magnetone amps a lot. You endorse with them, and you know, use Fender amps and your Vox AC 15 stuff like that. All the time. What are your thoughts on gear? Like, I mean,
my thoughts on gear is like I like gear for what the gear does. Like there's certain amps that do one kind of thing, or there's a guitar that does one kind of thing, or a lot of guys will get one amp and one guitar and try to get all these different sounds. The bottom line is it's all in your hands anyway.
Right.
Know, it's all in the whoever's playing the guitar, you know. I mean, I've seen guys playing just crappy guitars that are just smoking, you know, and get the best tone.
Well, Jack Pearson plays a Squier Strat.
Hey, don't
yeah,
talk.
I mean,
Talk.
Jackie, you know,
A Squier.
That Squier bass of yours is amazing.
I love it. I got it out yesterday.
You know, the bottom line is wood is wood is wood.
Exactly.
You know, so you can have 2 Les Pauls come off the assembly line that are just back to back, and they're both going to be different.
Yeah, exactly. It was a
Or
tree.
you can take 5 guitar players, put them on the same amp and the same guitar with the same settings, and each one of them are going to sound different.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, Eric
That's
Clapton's
the
going
bottom
to sound
line.
like Eric Clapton no matter what you plug it
yeah, it
in.
doesn't matter. So.
Well, you know, I got a Pete bass that there's no resale value to it. It's like the worst Epiphone they ever made, quote unquote. But it feels good and
Dude,
it
that
sounds
thing
good.
sounds so good.
Right,
Hey, I've got
it feels
a-
good and it sounds good.
I've got a
It's good.
$100 SG Epiphone I bought at the pawn shop just to use for slide. I just used it on a Kev Mo track, and it sounds great.
So,
You know, I was
Yeah.
like, well, you know, it doesn't matter. So
And they're tools. They're all
yeah.
yeah,
for
I
what
think
they
a
are.
lot of times people buy gear to impress other musicians.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, the bottom line is, you know, I mean, and you like it. If you like it, that's great. You know.
Well, that and you, I think there's some sort of mystical thing that we deep down we feel like it's going to make us better.
Oh
Maybe.
yeah, you know,
And it may or it may
and
not.
it may or may not, which is cool, you know. Or you know, you want this new pedal that everybody's got, that everybody's raved, which I've done that
Oh, it's
same
true
thing.
bypass.
I got to get this new Strymon or this new whatever,
Right.
the Klon, you know, which is, you know, and then you get it and you go, you know what, I really don't like that.
Right.
You know, this is not what I thought it was going to be. You know?
I'm going on
I like
10
my
years.
old Boss pedal better.
Yeah.
you
Actually.
know?
Yeah.
So,
I'm going on 10 years of looking for the right reverb pedal, and I haven't found it
yeah.
yet.
I tell you, the best reverb pedal I've found lately is that they don't make them anymore, but it's the Boss Fender Reverb.
Really?
It just
You talking about the 63 reverb?
the 63.
Dude, that thing sounds almost like the reverb
It sounds
tank.
to me exactly. I mean, I A/B'd it with a real reverb tank with the pedal, and told the guy, I said, turn around and you tell me which is which, and he couldn't do it.
So,
Well, that's like you being in the studio. We've talked about this a lot, about using the old Line 6 beam pod thing.
Oh, we
Shoot, man, you've made that sound amazing.
You know, I never forget. You know,
I traded a
when
bass
they
for a
first
bass.
came out, when the pod first came out, I got one because I thought, well, this would be convenient, you know. And there were actually some sounds in there that sounded damn
I
good.
need to find one. I used
So
to have it.
I got
need to get another
Johnny
one.
Sandlin called me up one day, and he said, "Man, I got this couple of tracks. I need some solos and stuff on." I said, "Okay, I'll be over there." So I brought the pod with me. Well, Johnny didn't like any of that stuff. You know, he even without even listening to it, he didn't want me to use it. He says, "No, we're not going to use it, man. Just go back and plug into my basement like we usually do, and I said, okay. So what I did, I went back there where the amp was, and I put that pod in line with the bassman, right? Got it on the setting that I had dialed in there. And we started cutting the track. And he, right about halfway through the first take, he was going, man, he said, did you do something different with your amp, with the amp or the guitar? I said, no. I said, man, it's killing. It sounds great. I was like, great, man. I don't know what. I'm just,
You never tell him?
No, he never knew.
That's
He
funny.
never knew. But we used to have those discussions like on the bus when we were on the road. It's like, if I played you a song right now off my iPod, could you tell me if it was cut on 2-inch or was it cut to Pro Tools?
Exactly.
You know, or the same thing. You know, it's 90% of the time you can't. You know,
It all goes down to the performance.
Well,
People
the performance
tend to perform
and
when
who's
they know
working and who's working the controls.
Yeah.
Who's getting the tones? I mean,
Exactly.
the engineer is as important as the guy's hands that are playing that lick.
Well,
So,
that and the vibe, and if you know we're cutting to 2-inch 24-track tape machine, you've got 24 tracks.
Yeah.
You don't have an endless supply of tracks. You can't get 8 kick drums. You commit to a sound and you go on. So you sometimes are more creative within limitations. And
well, I've always been a
performance
fan
is
of
where-
less is more when I'm listening back to something. You know, it's easy.
well, the more you add in a mix,
Yeah.
the smaller every little piece gets.
yeah,
because
it
it's
just
it's
gets
gotta find a place.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
You know.
But yeah, I find that like one time I was down at Fame and Ben Tanner was the engineer, the house engineer at the time, and we were in B. It was before they weren't really doing much in A at the time, and it was like the second edition of the Line 6 pod, the one that was the darker red, and I was like, why have you guys got that there? It was sitting on the console, and I was like, you got a Fender and a Vox and a Music Man amp sitting out there and a Marshall? He's like, it sounds different. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh, duh.
Yeah, I mean, I
It's-
can't
it's-
tell you
it
how many
sounds different.
records I played on using the pod.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, and if it didn't cut it, then I would go hook up to an amp or whatever.
Well, dude,
you know,
I had Will here in the studio a couple weeks ago. We plugged straight into Pro Tools.
Yeah.
And it sounded great. He
Yeah.
played that Epiphone Dot, and it was a great jazz sound.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
So, well,
Then again, you couldn't. Of course, you can tell sometimes similarities between a Strat or a Tele or a Les Paul, but a lot of people couldn't even tell you what kind of guitar somebody was playing.
right.
You
I mean,
know,
we geek
so-
out on all of that, but
Well, I once met a gentleman that loved music and just always listened to music. There was never silence around him.
Yeah.
And he found out I was
So
a
I love
musician.
silence.
Oh, well, he couldn't stand it, I
I
guess.
thrive for silence sometimes.
Well, he asked me what I played, and I told him I played bass. And he said, well, what's that?
but he
said,
just
what's that?
He said, what's
wow.
that? So I think sometimes we get in our heads.
There's a
and we
bass player joke in that somewhere.
Well, yeah, but the guy, he loved music in all its forms, but he didn't know what a bass guitar
He just
was.
enjoyed it.
He just
That's
liked
interesting.
music.
Well,
Yeah.
that's fine. You know, I mean,
That's actually
there are people
Yeah,
out there
that's
that
interesting.
love listening to music that don't have to know all
Yeah.
the details. You know, of
Sometimes
they don't
I
really
wish I
care.
could
You know,
kinda be-
the most of the time. Just to me now, we live in an instant gratification society. I want it now. Give
yeah.
it to me now. You know, majority of people are listening to their music on their iPhones or whatever. I remember having these conversations with Neil Young because he was developing his the
Pono.
Pono thing.
Oh, yeah, Pono.
And I said, man, the concept is great. You know, I'm all about your music sounding like it does in the studio. But the bottom line is the files are too big, the player's too expensive. The only people that are going to buy it really are the people that are true audio nuts that go for that kind of thing. The majority of the public turn their radio on, their Sirius XM or you know, their iPod, Bluetooth, you know.
They want the
Yeah.
convenience.
I mean, it was weird how you just pull out your phone and go, you know, play this.
I don't think Kirk will mind me quoting him, but the other week Kirk Russell said, talking about streaming, he said you can hear the squares, the compression. You can hear what you've lost in an
Well, sure. I mean, one thing I did learn in all the talks I had with Neil about it was, by the time your song gets down to an MP3, it's about 13% of what you were hearing in the studio.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was trying to, and he actually did it. I mean, I can remember being in L.A. and he had it was like a 71 Eldorado Cadillac. And we were at Sunset Sound Studios cutting one of Peggy's records, but Jim Keltner was there, Neil was there. Anyway, me and Spooner, our bass player, Rick, Jim Keltner and Neil got in the car. And Neil had it rigged up in there where he was playing the Pono thing that it was still developing, but he had an iPad, he had a MacBook in the trunk of the car, but just regular speakers,
Yeah.
But he had it rigged up where he could go from MP3 to the next resolution all the way up to the highest,
Yeah.
And so he asked me, so well, what do you want to hear? And I said, well, you got Aretha Franklin, He said, yep, I got Aretha Franklin. So he played, it's like Do Right Woman or something like that, because Spooner played on it. But, played the MP3, and then he got to the next resolution, and you could really hear a definite difference. And by the time he got to the 192, which I think is the highest, I could literally, when the background vocals came in, I could hear the vocal booth. That's how pristine the quality.
And that's what you're supposed to hear.
Yeah, that's what you're supposed to hear, in reality.
Because you put all these little nuances in if you're producing or
but I think
that's one
that's one reason why people are getting turned on more by vinyl nowadays, because it's the closest thing you can get to what it actually sounded like in the studio.
Well,
and it's active listening.
Let me jump in on this because I got something that I meant to tell you this, and I forgot to tell you the other day. Recently I came on a pretty decent, not quite hi-fi setup, but a pretty good vinyl setup. And the first thing I did was throw Dark Side on there because
you suck.
Yeah, I have nothing else to do. And a million times I've listened to that record, and I've always heard the Guards say, I never said I was afraid of dying. I never once in Great Gig in the Sky heard the woman in between breaks say, I never said that I was afraid to die.
There's a woman in that? Okay.
I never once heard it in my life.
I'm inviting myself over and we're going to listen.
You talking about when she was screaming?
Yeah, there's a little break in there where she said, and I never heard that before in my life, 20 years of listening to that record.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Cool. We got to sit down and listen to that and then watch Wizard of Oz.
Whenever we were checking out speakers, we would always put Steely Dan on there, because their records were always so pristine and clean, and anyway.
Yeah, Jimbo Hart turned me onto the band Stuff.
Oh yeah.
All that. Yeah.
Richard T. and all those guys. Yeah.
And anyway, all right. So
I also hadn't heard the banjos and Take It Easy until the other week. But that's probably just me not listening to it through anything but car speakers.
There is a banjo in that song. I never thought about it. Yeah, it is. It's there. Well, anyway, thanks, Kelvin. Let's wrap this up, man. Very much appreciated. Enjoyed sitting and talking with you.
I appreciate you giving us two times now.
Yep.
Yeah.
A and B side.
Yeah. And today we're not dodging tornadoes.
Yeah, right. So, which didn't come.
Didn't, thank God.
They ended up not canceling my classes. They sent an email telling us where the tornado shelter was and what to do, and didn't cancel class.
Well, all right,
man. Thanks.
Yeah, buddy.